I am absolutely delighted to be here in conversation with Larry Clark about his legendary film Passing Through. My name is Alessandra Raengo. I am Associate Professor of Moving Image Studies at Georgia State University. And I met Larry when the LA Rebellion films toured in Atlanta. And we started a conversation back then about the film and the artistic influences, the production history of the film. And Larry has graciously agreed to continue the conversation here. Mm-hmm. And so the first, as you know, the first thing that fascinates me and my research group about your film is your determination to think about it as an art object, especially at the time where there are beginning conversations that distinguish certain type of filmmaking as art cinema. And yet, even art cinema had theatrical distribution and a different life than your film had.
Yeah, well, the film premiered at, then it was called FilmX, the Los Angeles International Film Exposition. And at the time, it was an important and the largest public festival in the country. That's my understanding. But it was important in LA. And so I finished the film, and I wanted to have a local screening because all the actors and actresses and the crew and family could come to it, and I didn't want to just do it in a regular theater, and I wanted to kind of have it be special. So I submitted the film to the festival, and two important people were on the jury, I understand. One was Ivan Dixon. He was in Nothing But a Man, one of Charlie's favorite films. And the other person I was told was Vera Phil, who was a senior editor at Universal at the time. Anyway, they liked it and they included it in the festival. Actually, I sent them a work in progress because I was cutting a negative at the time, so I didn't have a completed print. But I was close enough to where, there was no problem in terms of time frame. So I was accepted. I rushed and finished and got the film done. Came out of the lab just about an hour before the lab closed. And so it was really tight, but I got it. And so it premiered there. Again, crew, family. My father was there. My grandmother was there. Clarence Muse, of course, was there. And so it was a good beginning for the film, and a lot of people saw it. There were some film programmers from Deauville and also from Locarno. And so they asked if I could show the film at Locarno. That was going to be the first European screening of the film. That would be the premiere. And also I was asked if I could screen the film at Deauville. That would be the second European. And then after that was Edinburgh. The interesting thing about Deauville was that when Passing Through screens at Deauville, I think it was the second festival that they had. It was a brand new festival, and now it's a really big and important American festival to show American films in France, So it showed early on in the career of Deauville. I had no idea it was going to go on to be what it was. But yeah, so those were the first 3 film festivals that it showed at. Then it showed at venues in different parts of the country. Chicago, I think, was one. Philadelphia was another. New York. And usually it's screened in community centers, basements of churches, I was told once it was screened on a wall outside, And then later, during the anti-apartheid movement in the 80s, it was screened a lot there for fundraisers. They would screen the film and raise money for different anti-apartheid kinds of organizations and events and stuff like that. But it had a lot of screenings around the country in non-conventional ways.
So how would people get in touch with you? I mean, how would they organize, set this up?
Well, word of mouth. But I had a phone, and people, it was by word of mouth. I didn't do any advertising at all.
So we were talking about your acquisition of the newsreel footage, and And you were describing it as accent marks in the film. And one of the accomplishments of the film is to incorporate them so smoothly and fluidly. You even shot some sequences to match the footage from Attica.
Yeah.
So can you elaborate on that a little more?
Well, I wanted the character, the Warmack character, to have a backstory, you know, that I thought was interesting and that would shape his choices, you know. So the scene where the musician Skeeter Wallace is blinded, Warmack comes to his aid and he beats this guy to death. All right, basically beats him to death. And so then the question is this self-defense or is this something more? And it all depends on how you look at it, you know, because this guy's life is being threatened. Or did he go too far, whatever. So it's manslaughter, something like that. And so I wanted to put him in a situation that spoke to incarceration. And I thought Attica was the perfect place because of the rebellion against it, you know. And so I got the newsreel footage of from Attica. And then I always had planned on putting him in Attica. And so I studied the newsreel footage, and then I decided that the film stock that I would use that could be a little bit closer to what was shot was Plus X. I think I shot it on Plus X, and then I had it transferred to color film or something. I did several things to kind of get it to match it. It wasn't a perfect match, but you know, it was a passable match. And then the action scenes and all, just to put him in that environment, to give him some backstory of what he had gone through. Yeah.
In the end result.
And also to talk about Attica, by the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The end result is one where the film, it seems that it's always the music that has this propulsive force, right? That triggers flashbacks, triggers, you know, as we were talking, one of my favorite scenes, the scene of the overdose, flashback within flashback, right? And so as much as it also connects the life of these fictional characters to the real world, right? You know, what are the circumstances where these characters live? So can you talk about this kind of generative role of the music, how the music is driving not only the narrative development of the film, but also the way the film reaches out into the real world, you know, into the kind of historical facts, historical events?
Well, I didn't want to bypass or ignore the negative role that drugs can have on the artist. Some artists, you know, obviously not all artists, but some artists, for all kinds of reasons, are drawn into that world. My own cousin, Sonny Clark, was drawn into that world. An artist in New York who had all the potential in the world, Bisquat, was drawn into that, you know. And so I didn't want it to be about that, but I didn't want to sidestep it either. Because if I had sidestepped it, then that would have been a big criticism, I thought. And just take it head on. And so this character, Brimmer, has this episode where he is using drugs, heroin. And of course there's the negative effect of an overdose. His friends come in and got to deal with that, you know. I wanted that piece to come out of, and that's also a piece of backstory, but I wanted it to come out of the discussion at that table when they first are introduced to Maya and Papa Harris. He was in New York, and Brimmer starts talking, and we see his mouth move, but we don't hear what he says. And so he's kind of, that's where that conversation goes. But there's another conversation happening on the stage with the musicians, telling a different story. And so another story comes out of that story, and we go to that flashback in black and white of him shooting up, overdosing, and them rushing him to the hospital, and the reaction of his friends to what has happened, you know. So it's a different shift in terms of story. It's a different shift in terms of tone. And there needs to be a smooth transition between those two things, in terms of the music. And the music was just right in the club, and it was a nice transition from that music to a different music, it's something, it could be the same music, but it wasn't.
Okay.
And so I was creating another environment with the second piece of music with this Bremer story, I called it. And then we come back to the old man in the club, and he has a horn. It's an African horn, literally a horn from Impala. Mm-hmm. And he plays one note, everybody else is, going through this music, and he plays one note, and that's the note that brings him back, because the Bremer has died. The instrument says he's dead. He's flatline.
Right.
And the old man plays that note, and when he plays the note, he's also there in the hospital with him. So he's really in two places at one time, in two dimensions at one time, and that note sort of connects the two and goes to another dimension of death and brings him back alive. It's a kind of a note only that person could have played, mm-hmm. because he knows him. He's the only one that can reach him. And also mm-hmm. it gives the old man kind of a spiritual quality, an otherworldness kind of quality. He's a master. He's a wizard. He's not an ordinary person, not an ordinary musician. He's a real mentor. With somehow connected spiritually to whatever.
Yeah, this is beautiful, and it's really leads me to another important question, which is the kind of the cosmological qualities of the music, mm-hmm. and what is the power of music is very powerful in this film, right? It's not just
the music speaks for itself. I mean, the music is just it's just powerful music. It's something in itself. And it inspires images. It creates images. I mean, it's just, the music is telling a story. And so you tap into that story, and that becomes another level for the story that you're telling. So you're telling a number of stories have been told in the film on different levels, mm-hmm. just like the music is being played on different levels. So the music is one story, then you got the unexplained accent marks of the documentary footage that comes in from time to time. Then you have the different levels of people's lives being told. There's Skeeter's story, there's Bremer's story, and all of it has to somehow, Maya's story, Papa's story, and these aren't necessarily subplots,
Right.
And I'm big on subplots, but they're not really subplots. They're accent marks. It's like when you listen to some music, things happen that are unexplained, and either it works or it doesn't work, and if you're on the same page, if you have the freedom to explore within a song or with a piece of music, you can. Music is a lot like a story, and you have a setup. You have a head, and this is where everybody's playing together, and that allows the harmony, and then you can go off and improvise, and then you can come back to the tale. Mm-hmm. And so the film is sort of similar to that, and because it's film, it also operates not on a linear level, but on a number of levels at one time. It's not a linear film. There are a lot of different levels, a lot of different sounds, a lot of images I didn't put there. They just became there. A lot of sound I didn't put there. It's just because you have these levels, they create kind of harmonic, a sound harmonic, and even a visual mm-hmm. harmonic, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't,
Yeah, this is one of the great accomplishment of the films is that it describes really a tragic predicament in many ways, right? So, and it's very critical. It's very radical. It's very radical. The use of newsreel footage definitely makes the point. The description of the relationship within the music industry definitely makes the point. And yet, the power of music, which is then represented in Papa Harris as a character, is that you have a sense that each one of them, each one of these characters, through music, can be in other places as well, right? So they're never stuck.
Right.
They're never, as much as, right, the situation is bleak, and the situation is, compromised, and their creativity is compromised.
Mm-hmm.
There is always another. They always have access to other possibilities. Right?
Yeah. One of the things I was telling you earlier, in my mind, and I also discussed this with some of the actors, is that they also they're kind of deities. Like Warmack, he's like Ogun. Maya, she's Yemenya. Papa, he's Shango. And then you have the character Oshun that shows up, So they operate on a spiritual level. The film is not about that. If I didn't tell you, you would never know that. But that's the subtext to the characters and the making of the film, and it's kind of internalized, but it's not something that the film is about. So that's that level too,
But one can feel it though, because especially through Papa Harris, right? The way he talks about the earth. Right, and picks up dirt. I mean, one has an idea that there is a cosmology underneath, right? That there is a different.
There also the main character, Mormack, he has a spirit guide, and the spirit guide is a leopard, but the leopard is black, so it's Black Panther, not the Black Panther Party, but it's that stare, that kind of dignity, that kind of power. So that was part of the discussion too. It's not in the film, but it's there.
Yes. Okay. So let's talk about the use of water, the imagery associated with water in the film. The key moments are, of course, the rehearsal, the practicing at the piers, the ocean waves, right? But also the rain. The amount of rain on this couple, and it seems that water in that case, rain in this case, is almost a symbol or a signifier of the amount of emotional work that Warmack needs to do, right? There's something about.
Well, yes, a number of things, I think. It's also texture. So starting with the car scene, the folks where they're in the car, they're after the club and they're driving, and the windshield wipers are going back and forth, and it's raining. In 16 millimeter, you can't sync up a 16 millimeter camera to rear screen projection. This doesn't exist, and so I've had to figure out how, and I did everything, the camera, the recorder, everything was running off of electricity and using a sync pulse of electricity, 60 cycles. That's how we kept stuff in sync. But there was a danger that the sync pulse, eventually we would lose it and the rear screen projector would flicker. And so when you have an effect, you also have to figure out how to cover it up. And so the first practical use of the rain was to cover up the rear screen projector in case it started flickering. At one point it does, but no one notices it because the windshield wipers are going back and forth in the foreground, and that's sort of like a musician, a magician who is doing something with this hand while he's doing something with that hand. So it was practical to cover up the flicker, first of all. It was also from an artistic point of view to add another dimension and texture to the scene, atmosphere, to add that kind of melancholy atmosphere. So it was more because the conversation is about, well, I haven't been able to find Papa, and so it's a get to know you scene, but it's also kind of melancholy. And so that was just to add to the atmosphere atmosphere. And then the scene afterwards, he calls her, and there's water on the telephone booth, and we use a spray bottle, and of course we're shooting through it, and then that matches with him dropping her off, and it's raining, But mostly atmosphere and mood. In the car, definitely atmosphere, mood, hiding a possible problem with rear screen projection. And it just pleased me. It just felt right for the scene. Warmack has some baggage. He's not clean. You know, he has a lot of baggage, and he's trying to get clean. You know,
Right.
and I'm talking about clean not in terms of drugs or anything,
Right.
just emotionally. He's been in prison, and he's looking for his grandfather. Musically, he's kind of trying to find his way, and that's he's on a journey, you know, and that journey shouldn't be easy. It shouldn't be bright and sunny all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one of the use of water. I mean, you know, regardless of the practical reasons, really resonates with other aesthetic traits of the film, and like a larger sense of liquidity. That's how I describe it, which is something you set up very clearly in the opening sequence, where images seem to be bleeding into one another, right? And so again, even in the most, let's say, straightforward narrative segments where there is dialogue, especially them as a couple, you know, working things out, the water and when you shoot them in the corner of that bedroom, you know, they're really cornered, right? And so the water outside, you know, the rain outside seems to really, but they're also cocooned in a way.
Yeah.
And the sense of liquidity is almost the idea that at any point, any element in the frame could move, it could bleed into something else. So again, it speaks to the I don't know, sense of possibilities, sense of how interconnectedness, right? How his personal life is connected to his sound, is connected to his, you know, musical.
It was one scene that I wrote, and then by that scene it says ×4. And that was a note to myself. I was going to shoot it 4 different times in 4 different locations in 4 different ways, and also some improvisation. And the primary thing is in a relationship, sometimes you get into one of these things, you know, and you can't agree on something, and finally you think it's resolved, and you find yourself a few days or a month later, you're back to that same place that really wasn't resolved, you know. And so now you're talking about something that you talked about a week ago or a month ago, and maybe you think then it comes back again, you know, and it comes back until you either you resolve it or you go your separate ways, you know. So what it really was improvisation around a theme, and that theme was that she had decided what she wanted to do with her life, you know, independently of any commercial, anything. You know, she was quitting the company. She's out on her own, something that he should have done. She made a step that he was unable to make. And so instead of being the leader, now he's the follower. You know, and men have a hard time following women. You know, we're not programmed that, especially in the 70s. She's made a conscious effort to do something that he should have done. And that becomes kind of the source, the unspoken, the subtext source of the problem that they're having. You know, she's decided to do something. She's going to work for herself. She's not working for anyone else. She's on her own. She's totally independent. She's totally free. He's still kind of stuck into, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to record? Am I not going to record? Maybe I should record. It's a moment of indecision for her. She's made a decision. And that is the subtext, and that's the problem they're going through, you know. And he's carrying so much baggage, you know, that he can't make that decision yet. You know?
So how is Papa Harris helping him out of this?
By,
you know,
by staying away. By staying away. You can't lean on me anymore. I can't be your mentor anymore. You got to do this yourself. I've told you everything that I could tell you. I don't need to tell you anything else. You have to do it yourself. You know.
And what about the box that he lives?
That's a riddle.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
the riddle.
That's the riddle. That's the key to the future. I can't tell you what you need to do now today, but I can point you in the direction for the future.
Let's go back to the question of the international life of the film, the distribution, where it was seen, and as you know, the LA Rebellion tour and the LA Rebellion kind of archival project now is very much invested in giving another life or another distribution to these films, right? And so some of them are being distributed in DVD, but there is a handful of them, Charles Burnett's and Haile Gerima that have always been distributed, and of course Julie Dash. And you obviously, for what you said, your film was seen a lot in a lot of places, but it did not have,
Right.
you purposely did not seek this type of distribution, and that also makes it unavailable or less available for scholarship. You're not going to have scores of graduate students writing about your film.
Thank goodness.
So exactly. So can you talk about that? What that decision was? What prompted? Was it something that was clear to you from the beginning?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. First, I never liked VHS. I would refuse to put anything on VHS. It just looked horrible. I didn't even like to watch movies on VHS, and so the quality was just bad. And you work hard, then to do something creatively, and then you put it on a format that just looks horrible. So VHS was an easy decision, not to put it on VHS. That was just no-brainer for me.
Right.
Also coming from a photography background, if it's not going to be presented in the right way, why bother? And so I that was an easy decision. With DVD and all that, that's a whole another ball game, because it's a much better format. But the point was, the film was never meant to be commercial. It was never meant to be on a DVD where you put it in or VHS, and then you stop and you go get some popcorn, or you go get dinner, or you answer the phone, or you're talking to someone, then you come back maybe a week later, maybe never, to watch it. It was meant to be shown at an audience where people are actually watching it. I once heard Charlie Mingus berate an audience what the musicians were playing. He says, I don't want any talking while we're playing. I don't want to hear any glass tinkling, ice tinkling in your glass. I say, I want you to pay attention. And this is a shocking thing for jazz musicians to tell the audience. But if you go to a concert, you're not going to be, if you listen to classical music, everybody, if you make cough, people are going to shush you, If you go to ballet or modern dance, you're not going to go and get some popcorn, And with jazz musicians, a lot of times their music is abused by people not really paying attention to what they're doing. They think it's some kind of background music while they talk business, or while they romance somebody, or just chit-chat. And so he sort of said, look, give us some respect here. We're playing, So the idea was that, make this film, so why put it on a format where it can be abused? It's format where you see it in a theater with people, and you start the film and you watch it to the end, just like any other commercial film, although commercial films are put on DVD later. I just didn't like the idea of it. And I was and I was inspired a lot by what Charlie Mingus said, So I would rather for 12 people to see it and really see it than 1,000 people see it and not pay attention to it,
And how do you feel about repeated viewing? You talked about Howard University having a copy, and Arthur Jaffa and Ernest Dickerson watching the beginning over and over again, right? So this is a different type of consumption or relationship to the film, right?
Well, Haile Garima teaches at Howard University, and he said, I like to have a copy for Howard University. I said, Haile, I'm not interested in selling any copies. No, students need to, Haile can be very persuasive. And so he said, we'll buy it, we're paying money for this. And I said, Haile, please. And so finally, he wore me down, and I sold a print to Howard University, and said, okay, that's done. Now Haile will leave me alone, okay? And so about a year or a year and a half go by, maybe 2 years, a short period of time, actually, and I'm talking to Haile, or he called me and said, well, that print we bought is no good anymore. I said, what do you mean it's no good? He said, well, some students, they watched it over and over again, and they just really wore it out. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, some students that really liked the film, and they just kept watching it over and over and over. And now it's just you can't watch anymore. They just literally wore it out. I'm thinking, who are these people? They must be really interested in film, or I don't know what it is. So I pretty much forgot about it. Then later I find out who it is. And is Ernest. I was told it was Ernest Dickerson and Joffre, and he kind of let it slip out. And I said it was. So you were one of those people who looked. He said yeah. And I met Ernest Dickerson at San Francisco Film Festival, just in passing, and I had never met him before. And somebody introduced us because we were in the same area, and I said, "Oh, this is Ernest Dickerson. This is Larry Clark." And Ernest said, "Are you the guy that made Passing Through?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, when I was a student at Harvard, we just looked at that film over and over and over again." So I feel that he was probably one of those people, you know. But the point was, the film was also one of the reasons why I made the film, and it was a conscious effort, is that when you talk about aesthetics, all right, and we always talked about black aesthetics for film, you know, but we never could define it, you know. You could define, to some degree, a black aesthetic for jazz. And one of the things that make an aesthetic, any kind of aesthetic, whereas jazz aesthetic, Indian aesthetic, Japanese aesthetic, you have to have a critical mass of people doing it. A critical mass of people involved in that conversation. Mm-hmm. And in film, we never had a critical mass of people involved in the conversation. You know, in jazz we did, you know. In Japan, the Japanese have a real aesthetic that's Japanese, and so. But to get to that point, you have to have a critical mass of people who are, and that, they don't have to be Japanese, by the way, because Japan, the language is based on the kanji is based on Chinese characters. Mm-hmm. The religion is Buddhist from India, you know. So sometimes outside forces can contribute to the aesthetic. So one of the reasons I made Passing Through was to inspire young filmmakers, to increase our numbers, so that at some point we would have a critical mass of people doing it in a conversation, and that's when an aesthetic will start showing itself, like with jazz. And you know, we're slowly creeping toward that, you know, because the films made by African Americans have a particular look. Even the ones that are high budget, you know, or the lowest budget, there's something that has sort of commonality, and there's some discussion about this, you know. Mm-hmm. Not as much. We're nowhere close to a critical mass where an aesthetic will actually. In music there is, and so you get jazz, you get hip hop. Right. You know, you have that critical mass of people doing it, and you'll find an aesthetic that then sort of spreads out and goes everywhere, you know. So
would you think? Are you aware of any kind of similar uptake, or kind of the aesthetic choices of the film abroad? Like, are you aware of whether the film has been influential?
I don't know.
Or hasn't shown enough? I mean, yeah, it would be very difficult to.
I don't know, but I know when the film showed in Cannes at a special event, there was this one young guy. He's a black Brit, and he came to Cannes. He was pretty broke, and so we had meal tickets, and so we gave him some, so he wouldn't starve to death. You know, he was really a nice guy. And he and some of his friends went to see the screening of Passing Through, and they came back. They they thought it was a new film. I said, no, this film is older than you are. Mm-hmm. You know, it's 27 years old now, or 25 years old now. And it was new. We thought it was new. I said, no. But I don't know. You know, I have no idea. You make it, you send it out in the world, and you know, Tufo said something really interesting. He said, how did he put it? He said, films are never finished; they're just abandoned. Mm-hmm. You know, mm-hmm. And so at some point you just got to abandon it. You know, you just want to leave it alone, and so I have no idea whether it did or it did not.
But one of the things that you just said mm-hmm. is that, which I think is still true, mm-hmm. at least I've seen, you know, people's mm-hmm. reactions to the mm-hmm. later screenings, is that it feels tremendously timely. Mm-hmm. It's not, mm-hmm. it feels of this moment, of any moment. Mm-hmm. I mean, in a way, it's not dated, it's not, it's incredibly visionary, it's maybe it's the breath, in a way, the breath of jazz, you know, that there's something that continues to resonate.
But I do know when Spike Lee made Mo Better Blues, you know, I could see some similarities in the lighting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just rewatched that.
Yeah. On stage, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they kind of went a little bit too far with the blue. They picked a blue. It was beautiful blue, but the transmission, the light didn't go through very far, so they had to kind of bend over to get into the lights, you know.
Do you think you were partly inspired also by the other artists that were working on the film or with the film or in the community, Horace Tapscott, and their choices? And
yeah, absolutely. Horace Tapscott was a fabulous musician, and he didn't worry about the commercial world. You know, he played his music. He mentored a lot of musicians. He made it possible for people to woodshop and come out of that as better musicians. You know, he was a lot like Papa Harris, you know. And so the point is that there are other things to look at other than fame and fortune, you know. That's not everything. For some people it is, and that's what they want, and fine, you know. But there are other things too, and you can have an impact without ever being known, you know. And that's what I got from Horace, you know. You know, he was true to himself. He was a very unselfish guy, you know. And then also people in the arts community in LA, they were very true to themselves, you know.
So I find it really beautiful that for a musician like Tapscott, who was unable or refused to record for a certain amount of time, to have such a phenomenal piece be part of your film, because now this is, in a way, the best form of recording. So
Well, when I first met Horace was with the film prior to Passing Through. That was As Above, So Below. And I was looking for someone to do the music for that film, As Above, So Below. And someone said, there's Horace Tapscott. He's a musician. He lives right in the community. You should ask him. Maybe he knows somebody. So that's my first meeting with Horace. I said, well, I just made this film, and you know, and a lot of musicians in LA, and I'm trying to figure out who I can get to do the score for, and blah blah blah. And Horace listened patiently. When I got to the end of it, he said, well, you know, I don't know why you're going out there to look for musicians. There are musicians right here in your community, you know, that live right here. Why don't you look at the musicians that are right here? I thought, wow, and he said, well, come down, because at the time they were playing on Sundays at a church, or was it Saturdays? It was at a church, and the Pan-African People's Orchestra. So I went. He gave me the address. I went down, and it was really amazing what I saw. It was like an ark. It was like Noah's Ark. It was all these musicians that were there, you know, and some of them were really great, like Arthur Blythe. Some of them were on the cusp of being great, like Roberto Miranda, who is great now. And there were some that were just starting out, like Jesse Sharps.
Yeah, what's interesting is that it seems that not only what emerges from the film, but also from the community, the larger community that you're just describing, art is not just something that expands the mind, offers possibilities, but the very mode of production is an alternative form of community.
Oh, right? Yeah.
It's already, so there seems to be, one question that I had, and I don't know if the way I phrase it is comfortable for you or not, but I would want to ask, in art, and maybe in your art, what constitutes political action? What is action, right? Because in a sense, you say, well, part of the political action of art is to afford ways of thinking differently, changing little things, right? But now there's also a mode of production that seems to be already politically, important. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, and part of it is going out with the film. You know, I've been traveling with this film for a long time, and we get into these kinds of discussions, you know, as Charlie has, as Hailey has, as Julie has, as everybody else, you know. So that's part of it too, you know.
Okay, let's go back to the album covers, right? You said that they were kind of one of the. I'm very interested. We are all very interested in your visual sources.
Speaking
please.
of mode of production, this is interesting because, it was, you know, with Passing Through, I had a film workshop.
Yes.
Performing Arts Society of Los Angeles, or PASLA. And in that workshop, it was set up to teach film. And the people who came were people who didn't want to work in Hollywood, who didn't particularly want to go to film school, but they were enamored with film. Young, 20, 25. And so I brought cameras down and everything, and people learn really fast, faster than film students even. And so I created a situation where I had crew. I didn't have to rely on students. These were people in my community. Charlie did something very similar. He organized his whole block, and the people that were in his film lived on his block. People who worked on his film, for the most part, were on his block. Haile had his own peculiar way of working. He commandeered a apartment complex that had been condemned. We squeezed through the doors and we shot all summer in that condemned apartment, which had residents, by the way.
For Bush Mama?
For Bush Mama, yeah. So we all had, it was necessary to do things that you don't normally do, because we had lack of resources, but we did have a lot of cooperation. We could I went into this thrift store because we needed beds for a scene for Haile's film, beds and iron rod beds, and the woman said, well, I asked how much they were, and I said it's kind of expensive. We're working on our master's degree at UCLA, and our budget is limited. She said, oh, you boys are working on your master's degree. You can have this. You can just take it. When you finish, just bring it back. So we got all these props for free. So we got a lot of cooperation from the community. They were part and parcel of the making of the film. It wasn't like we're making a film and bringing it to the community.
Right.
It was made in the community by the community. So the mode of production was different. In a sense, it was kind of like a reinvention of Italian neorealism. You don't have much to work with, and you figure out how to do it.
Right.
And you make things your limitations work for you rather than against you, and actually you find out you don't really have any limitations.
Right, and that's one of the, actually, it's Jacqueline Stewart, in one of the essays she's written, that's how she captures it, the power of Black imagination. There is a sense that the imagination is boundless.
Yeah, all these
and that is, really powerful.
all these films were made for, like less than $14,000. Feature-length films are competing with in
Right.
major film festivals with big budget films and winning prizes. I think Charles' film Killer Sheep was made for about $8,000. He shot one roll of film a week, and that's all he could afford. And in the 52 weeks, he had 52 rolls of film. He had his film, and then he cut it together, and he used some old glue to put the negative together that he found, and he sent it off to the lab, and the glue came apart, and he had to go get his film and recut it and remix it, and that film won the Critics' Prize in Berlin.
Yeah.
And he got the Genius Award, the MacArthur Grant.
Yes. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
In terms of, I do want to touch on the question of visual sources, because you and I talked about it off camera, and one is the album covers.
Yeah.
If you just can mention some of them, and also to think about the album cover as an object where music meets the visual, right? So.
Yeah. Well, when I decided to make the film, first you have to figure out at some point what's going to be the look of the film, any film. What's going to be the look of it? What kind of atmosphere am I trying to create? What kind of environment am I trying to create? What is it I want the audience to take away? And so, of course, if you're making a film on jazz, it seems to me there are two places you're going to start with immediately. One is album covers for me, and then nightclubs. And I'm talking about big nightclubs, but small, intimate nightclubs that were like where Warmack might play. Right. And so the album covers, I had been fascinated with since I was a kid. My dad was into jazz and into Latin music, and he had a lot of albums, and I just loved the artwork on the front and the back. And a lot of it was Cubist-inspired modern art, which goes well with jazz, And so you get a sense of how it's been presented. Historically it has been presented in a particular, the music has been presented in a particular way, artistically. And so that's a good clue in terms of perhaps what this film should look like. Uh, and a lot of modern art were on these album covers front and back, and I said, this is interesting, you know. And also I like modern art. I like Cubism. I've been enamored with Cubism since I was just a kid, you know, for whatever reason I was. So that's, you know, start. Then you go to real life stuff, and that's the small clubs. And there were a couple. There was one in Los Angeles, or actually two, but one in particular that I would go to. It was in Venice. It was called the As Is, and what it was a club. It was in someone's house. They lived there, but they had made the living room into this place where they performed jazz. It was a husband and wife, and I would go there and listen to the music because they could play, and people came in. It was a really intimate venue, and the lighting was set up. You know, the red lights and the blue lights and all of that. And so the kind of club lighting, and you can see photographs of musicians playing, and so it's a certain motif, you know, that makes sense. And so that was pretty much a big clue in terms of the look of the film, especially the album covers, you know. And so I didn't necessarily copy any one individual album cover intentionally. I just sort of absorbed and internalized all of them, you know, to come up with something. And of course, I'm sure that Under the Pier shot, you know, I have to check the dates, but I'm pretty sure that was inspired by Sketches in Spain by Miles Davis. You know, the album cover on that, you know, where you have it in silhouette. So that's probably where that came from. But it might have come from somewhere else too. So I didn't consciously copy anything, but I looked at it all and kind of got an idea of what the look should be. So primarily album covers, clubs, photographs to some degree, African art, maybe to tribal art, maybe to a lesser degree, and then you get a sense of, and then you see something unique in it. It's not only does it speak jazz, it look jazz, but aesthetically it's outstanding because this is really. And the music lends itself to that kind of art, to that kind of superimposition and all of that. And you can be very creative and experimental with any film done on jazz, you know. Most films that I've seen on jazz, you know, they're heavy on story, as they should be, because it's the story, it's the most important thing. But the structure is not jazz. Right. The structure is Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and traditional storytelling on everything that I've seen. And for me, the traditional storytelling in this film didn't please me. I didn't think it would work or present the film the way I wanted to, and it definitely didn't please me. So I felt that I had the possibility of improvising, of going off and hitting one note and coming back, flash forward, flash back. You know, you have the kind of a freedom to tell the story however you want. There's still a structure, you know, and it's still a 3-act structure, but within the 3-act structure, there's a lot of things that you can do. And so I tried to do everything, you know, and find a structure that made sense in terms of jazz, you know. And in some places it works, and in some places maybe it doesn't work. But that was the idea. It was a conscious decision. So the opening of the film, for example, that is. You know, you used the term earlier, soft edge cubism, which it is. You know, the layers of superposition and things that are there that I put there, things that appear that I didn't put there, and all the different colors. And everybody always talks about that opening.
Yeah.
Everybody always talks about the opening. I've never had anybody walk out on the opening. Right. You know, at film festivals, people are brutal, and sometimes they do it just to show how important they are, and that is they walk out on the film in a heartbeat. You know, no one's ever walked out on that.
I think it's mesmerizing. I mean, it's absolutely.
Yeah. So then there's some other things that Under the Pier, and then how do I get from Under the Pier? That's that superimposition of his face. You know, it's very much improv. I didn't intend that in the beginning, but in the editing process, I decided to put it there. The wave, I wanted a big wave, and I was going to shoot it, and I never got a big wave, but I bought a wave, because I wanted it there, and I don't know exactly why, but it's the transition from the present to the past to his childhood. I just felt I needed that wave. I needed to be near the ocean, but not on the beach.
Mm-hmm.
But, and
Can you tell us where the wave comes from? You told me, but
it is an outtake. It is a shot that they didn't use in the Ten Commandments, and I bought it at the stock footage house in Los Angeles.
I love that story. To me, it's like,
yeah. So I went to Santa Monica Pier, and I waited for a big wave to come in with my camera, and a wave that was sufficient never really came in. They would just sort of peter out as they got there, and I went there many times, many storms. And so finally, I was going to buy some footage. What I was looking for was some footage of an eagle, because I had this idea of an eagle coming out of Warmack's eye that I never used. I had the footage, but I never used it. And so I just happened to mention, oh, by the way, do you happen to have a really humongous wave here? And the woman that worked there was really interesting. She was like a Jewish mother, really sweet. Young man, how can I help you? She was so friendly, and she would bring me footage. And I said, see, I have just the thing for you. And it was in 35, and I had to reduce it to 16. And I said, this might work. It's an outtake from the Ten Commandments, and we bought it. It's something they never used in the film, but we bought it, and so I bought it. And that's where it came from. Yeah.
That even emphasizes even more this idea. One of the connections between jazz, cubism, and collage, right? Collage. I mean, of course, editing is always collage to some extent, but there are, ways in which this is more the case, or it's somehow becomes an aesthetic principle of the film, especially this idea of layering and collaging. Mm-hmm. But can you just say a bit about, right? So you describe it as soft cubism. What's the softness? I mean, where does the softness come from, or what does it describe?
Well, actually, I heard you say that, or maybe it was in your question, and I had never thought about that. Well, the thing is that you have these superimpositions, so you need to be able to see what's coming in, the instrument, but at the same time there's overlap, and where there's overlap, that's where it's soft, and so it doesn't have a hard edge. And so I think aesthetically it looks really great, and the person who actually did the printing of that was a guy named Pat O'Neill, who was apparently he was a very important person in experimental film, and he was really good at that technically. And so I shot it with the notion that this instrument would be here and that instrument be over here, and then I bring another in this dark area because it was reversal film, and so the black acted as a matte. And I made sure when I shot it, I got the blacks. We really crushed those blacks, so I have a clean place for the instruments to come in. But where the overlap is, then that becomes a little bit, that those edges are soft, and it kind of blends and it kind of works together, and the colors kind of make different colors and colors that I didn't see before on the keyboard.
It seems to be a way to emphasize transitions as important, not as to be overlooked, right? As you were painting growing up, right, and you were layering, and your paintings were very thick, and you said you were fundamentally making a film.
Yeah.
But how do you feel, either experience or conceptualize the difference between, painting is your gesture. There is an immediate connection, right? There is an immediate result.
Yeah.
And you're in control in a different way, plus it's a solitary, right, enterprise versus a collective. Yeah. So can you talk about the relationship between those two artistic modes?
Well, actually, I have been working on a number of scripts. And screenplay, that writing is a lonely process, know. And there are very few people you can really talk to about your work while it's in progress. When you have something, you can. And so you don't get that immediate gratification, And also, if the script is not made into a film, then it doesn't exist. Okay? Yeah. So, I don't know, one day I just got up and I started to paint and I went and got some paint. I started out on paper, 24 by 30, I think it was. and I was quite amazed, at the results, and it also was something that the images, as a filmmaker, you want to make images, and you want to be able to share those images. And so with the painting, it's something I could do. I do it by myself. I can roll out of bed anytime, day or night, and just work on the painting, and it's great, And so you kind of get that expression out, and my paintings are very colorful. They're consistent in the way we're passing through.
Mm-hmm.
They're, and some of them are layered, multi-layered, and it's probably something I should have been doing all along, But when I got into film school, because I started out as a photographer. I gave all my cameras away because I wanted to make a clean break from still to movies, rather than a still image to moving image. And so I said I would just give all my photography stuff away, which I did. Heidi's ex-girlfriend.
She had the stuff?
She was interested in photography, and Heidi's my friend. Oh, take this stuff. I don't need it anymore. I'm doing motion pictures now, and I just wanted to think in terms of moving images, and I thought still photography would hold me back.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped looking at television too. I got rid of my television. Stopped looking at television. Started watching good films.
So I want to thank Larry Clark for being so generous in remembering key important moments about the film, about the making of the film, about the artistic influences, the moral production, the life of the film. And maybe I do actually have one concluding question, which is, what life do you see to this film now, moving forward, if you can conclude with that?
Yeah, It took me a long time to warm up to this film. I was done. I was happy I was done. You see all the things that you don't particularly like about it, that you wish you had done differently. And over time, I appreciate it a lot more, than initially that I did. Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes to screenings and reaction to it, that, enough people do get it.
They demand to see it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.